You're live.
Hello, I'm Benny Green. I'm sending greetings to all from my family home here in Berkeley, California. I just wanted to say at the onset of, I was going to say my chat, but my talk today, that I was informed by my telephone that my version of Safari may have an audio stutter in the opening minutes. I hope no one's experiencing that. But as said, I'm Benny Green, jazz pianist, and I was born in New York City in 1963. My mother comes from Newark, New Jersey. My father comes from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And my father played the tenor saxophone. He only worked as a saxophonist semi-professionally because my father didn't actually read music, but he had a great feeling, and he loved this music. And I grew up hearing the records my father was listening to, as well as hearing him play his horn around the house. And his style of playing the saxophone was very inspired by Lester Young. That was the way it sort of sounded and felt. Lester Young, nicknamed Prez, that was my father's man. So my father would listen to records. As two in particular were sort of on heavy rotation in our garage, in our backyard, which he sort of converted to his den and workspace as an artist. My father sculpted and painted, as well as playing the horn. Excuse me. So two of the records I mentioned my father was listening to often that really captured my fascination as a child was the Thelonious Monk album Monk's Dream, which was recorded in 1962, which features Charlie Rouse on the tenor saxophone, John Orr on the bass, and Frankie Dunlop on the drums, and a collection of recordings of Charlie Parker that were made originally on the Dial label. And the core of the program on this particular collection my father had were the quintet recordings that Charlie Parker made in 1947 with young Miles Davis on trumpet, Duke Jordan on piano, Tommy Potter on bass, and Max Roach on drums. Songs like Scrapple from the Apple and Dewey Square. So those two records, the Bird record, Charlie Parker record, and the Monk record, really, they changed me. They fascinated me. They just captured my attention and interest. And my father saw that I was digging, just hanging out with him, not talking, just letting the records play, and me watching how the music was moving him while he was sculpting the whole thing. And my father told me, he said, if you like this music we've been listening to, he didn't give it a name, but he said, if you like this music we've been listening to, he said, you should understand this is Black people's music. He said, that doesn't mean that everyone can enjoy it. He said, and there are white people who play the music well, but most of the white people who play the music well are actually imitating what the Black people created. And that was the very first thing my father told me about this music that I call jazz. I realize as I speak now in 2021 that there's sort of some sort of a debate or controversy about the use of the word, which obviously we all know has very derogatory origins, no question about it. But it's the word. I'm a jazz messenger. I'm proud to be, and it's the word that people I've worked with from the beginning. Betty Carter, when she sang the song "Jazz Ain't Nothing But Soul," it's just the word um, uh, with all its ill repute that I've always known and loved from my mentors and heroes. All I'm saying is at 57, I'm not about to change horses midstream, but I do respect uh, that there are Black American masters, voices of the music, such as Miles Davis, whose interviews I can watch myself and see that he hates that word. So that's to be respected. So I'll just say to each their own, without taking more time on that subject here, as I rant to myself, as I do any given moment on any day. We just happen to be going live right now. So, Gail Boyd, thank you for having me, Gail. First met Gail while I was playing with Betty Carter. And she was helping Betty uh, as a friend and comrade in many regards, but specifically as her lawyer. And yeah, so we met back in, I want to say 1983, if I'm not mistaken, maybe summer of 83. I joined Betty in April of 83. And so Gail, fast forwards, sorry I digress, has encouraged me to speak about my career. So I was introduced to jazz by my father, as I mentioned, and we got a piano in our home when I was 7. My parents didn't try to push becoming a musician on either me or my sister, who's 4 years older. But my sister began taking lessons right away, and I was really, really into the piano. I was really taken with the piano. I would sit at the piano every day when I was, see, 6. Yeah, my lessons started when I was 7. Sorry. And just sort of try to improvise my own simple melodies. I asked my parents for lessons, but because we didn't have a lot of money, they decided to hold off until I was 7. So my lessons started when I was 7. They were sort of beginning child's introductory piano lessons, like very beginning classical lessons, we'll say, but really just learning the names of the notes and how to read the notes on the treble and bass clef and such. So my teacher noticed after a few lessons that I really like to change things each time. So she telephoned my parents, recommended they find a jazz teacher for me. And things started coming together because when I went into the 4th grade, into Longfellow Elementary School here in Berkeley, I encountered a man named Phil Hardiman, who passed a few years ago, who mentored so many of us kids over the years. And he would go to all the public schools in Berkeley, beginning at the 4th grade level, all the way up through high school, different days of the week, and coach us and lead a band in each one of these schools, a jazz band. And he really helped kind of get our feet wet, I want to say, with a sense of comfort, choosing our own notes. He would write out like a simple bass lines for a B-flat blues, maybe 2 variants of choruses. Nice, good, solid melodic bass lines. And then he would give us what he called solo notes, which would be what's called like a blues scale, like a minor pentatonic scale that's got a flat 5 in it. And he would give us something like that, or just the pentatonic without the flat 5, depending on the song. And give us songs with harmonic progressions of the sort that sort of lent themselves to being able to play a pentatonic scale like this and having it sound melodious. And so that helped give us a confidence, right? Because we were choosing our own rhythms and combinations of the notes. So that was very important for me. Another link that Mr. Hardiman really fulfilled for me and other kids was seeing my own age group attempting to play the music, which I would otherwise associate only with older people. My father and the faces on the record covers of the music he was listening to. So Yeah, my father, or when I was around maybe 11, 12, uh, he saw that I was hanging around the music a lot, listening to his records, and he sort of challenged me in a sense, if we could call it that. He spoke to me here in the house one day, and he said, "Ben, uh, you're going to need to make a choice whether this music is like a hobby or it's your life." And I knew in that moment, I said, this is what I'm doing. This is my life. I'm a jazz pianist. And I feel that perhaps part of my father's motivation for speaking to me that way was knowing that he had chosen to balance many things, including fatherhood in his life, including the fact that he hadn't actually learned how to read music, which is one of the things that my father really emphasized to me, along with learning what we call standards, American popular songs, and instrumental jazz standards, learning the repertoire, the canon, if you will, of jazz. So my father encouraged, I listened to the jazz radio station, which at the time that I was growing up here was a station called KJAZ in Alameda, which is defunct. And then years ago, KCSM in San Mateo became our beloved jazz station here in the community. And, you know, in New York, of course, there's WBGO, and down in the Los Angeles area, there's K-Jazz, and these stations are so important. But back in the day, before we had an internet, before we had YouTube, they were huge, getting to listen to records on the radio. So my father encouraged me to do that. With the equivalent today, I should say, would be, to translate it, checking out more YouTube videos, I suppose. But at the time, my father was encouraging me to listen to the radio. We would listen together. He wanted me to begin to learn things about the history of the music and how the musicians influence one another, inspired one another, how they're sort of like a family tree to the music. So I began gigging professionally, first with a comrade of mine, just a couple years older, wonderful alto saxophonist named Eddie Minifield, who's been playing with Sheila E. for years. And he hired me for his band, a funk band of his. I think it was Eddie Minifield and the Funky Five. So, yeah, I got to play like Parliament Funkadelic on the roads with the brothers. That was great for me. Then sitting in at a jam session, Faye Carroll's husband, her late husband Jim Gamble, heard me sitting in Richmond with a trombonist, Tricky Lofton, and took my number, and Faye ended up hiring me. And that was like really my first steady professional gig, working here with Faye Carroll, which was huge. Leading the trio to play a couple tunes to bring her on up front, really dealing with the blues, and having Betty, excuse me, that was a slip, fast forwarding to Betty Carter, because they're both musical mothers of mine, Faye Carroll and Betty Carter. But having Faye talk with me about the blues and listen to records with me and talk with me about the culture of the music is huge. It's remained a cornerstone of my professional musicality, things that Faye Carroll gave me. And then I began working as well with Eddie Henderson. And Eddie was, for me, if you will, it is in a sense, but he's so much more because he's a friend to me. But musically and spiritually, he was like a link to Miles Davis and Lee Morgan and Freddie Hubbard. Because he had friendships, he had relationships with all three of those masters. And so getting to work with Eddie, I felt like I was so much closer to being in New York City. and getting ready to do what I've gone on to get to do. Eddie and Faye really gave me the groundwork for what became my 10 years just being mentored and learning and growing with Betty Carter and Freddie Hubbard years later. Art Blakey is the one who just completely so ignited my sense of purpose in life. Hearing him numerous times. The first live experience was audio only. I was hearing a live broadcast that was emanating from the Monterey Jazz Festival in 1977 of the Jazz Messengers with Bobby Watson, Valerie Ponomarev, David Schnitter, George Gables, Dennis Irwin, and Art Blakey. And then I got to hear the band just a few months later in person at Keystone Corner in San Francisco, the original Keystone Corner, which was like it was like the beyond the Village Vanguard of the West Coast. The vibes in there, really spiritual place. So hearing the Messengers live with James Williams, and then a few years later, hearing the Messengers live also at Keystone with Donald Brown on piano, I realized that this is it. This is it. I'm a messenger. As best as I can verbalize it now as I speak, I saw myself up there playing with Boo. The eye contact, the way he was interacting with James and Donald, we call him Silk, Donald Brown. I saw myself doing that. And so I, within months of hearing the band live with Donald Brown and Wynton Marsalis, Branford Marsalis, Bill Pierce, and Charles Fambro, within months of that, I was in New York. My dear friend, John Donnelly, bassist, he drove us across the country in his VW bus. We arrived in New York in spring of 1982. First, we crashed with a dear friend, flautist Cheryl Pyle, who John knew from UC Berkeley here. Lived in the East Village, and first musician we met was the late, great alto saxophonist Clarence C. Sharp, like almost as soon as we were coming out of the door. God, within minutes, certainly within an hour of arriving there. And that's how magical New York was in those days. Gail, if you could send me a text, please, just to let me know whether I should finish at 2:30 or since we started at 2:07, if I should go to 2:37. That's Pacific time. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. This is my way. And freelanced my first year in New York. John Donnelly and I eventually ended up being roommates with Joe Jones Jr., son of Papa Joe Jones. And we became the house rhythm section for the Jazz Forum, the original Jazz Forum at Broadway and Bleecker. Art Blakey lived just around the corner at the time in the Bleecker Courts. And thank you, Gail. Going on. And Johnny O'Neill, the great Johnny O'Neill, who was playing piano with Art Blakey at the time, met me and heard me at playing for the jam session at the Jazz Forum, and he introduced me to Art. And Art looked me up and down in my blue jeans, my plaid flannel work shirt, sneakers, I'll bet. And he said, "How long you been in town?" And I told him, whatever it was, 7 weeks. And Boo looked me up and down again. He said, "You need more time." He was right. And Boo used to have an expression. He would say, "See with your ears and hear with your eyes." So he just read me. And I knew he was right. But I just hung out, especially with one record called The Album of the Year by Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, which was recorded, I believe, in 1980. Played along with that record. And I would sneak my little Sony Walkman cassette recorder into the shows and record the band live. And the band at that time was Terrence Blanchard, Donald Harrison, Bill Pierce, Johnny O'Neill, and Charles Fambro, with Boo. And so I would stay abreast of the band's repertoire taping their shows and playing along with the tapes. Later on, I met Walter Bishop Jr. at the Jazz Forum, who became my New York father. That's what he called himself. And he would introduce himself as such, and he treated me that way. Everyone would go to Bish's house, as particularly to maybe take at least one lesson about his concept, which was called a study in fourths, a melodic concept using the interval of a perfect fourth. Everyone would come through. Woody Shaw, everyone. So one day I met the great jazz messenger Donald Harrison in Bish's house, and so Bish introduced us, and Donald was so kind and welcoming to me right away. He helped me. I showed him how I was playing the Wayne Shorter piece one by one, and Donald showed me how this piece of Wayne Shorter's, like some other pieces of Wayne Shorter's, actually has a melody in the bass movement, which I wasn't even thinking about. I was just thinking about the top. So he helped me with that. And later, Betty Carter heard me playing in Long Island at a club in Seaport, Long Island called Sonny's Place. And Betty dug me, and she took my number, had me come audition for her, and she hired me. I'm really fast forwarding now, as you can maybe tell, because I had the long setup about my childhood, and even that was abbreviated. But I got to play with Betty for 4 years, traveling the world, most demanding of being in the moment and being honest and respecting the platform, the outlet of getting to play music for people, with people, and telling a story, bringing our heart in telling a story with these songs, playing in every tempo, every key, just getting my ass kicked with so much love. And then the opportunity came. Delphio Marsalis telephoned me, pre-cell phones. He telephoned Bernard Harper's mother's house while I was rehearsing with the Harper brothers in their home on my Rhodes that John Donnelly and I had brought from Berkeley, California. It was Philip Harper, Justin Robinson, myself, Michael Bowie, and Bernard. And Delphio Marsalis called and said, "Benny, you need to get your butt down to Sweet Basil tonight. Silk's getting ready to leave the band," meaning Donald Brown was getting ready to leave the band. I came down. It seemed like every young piano player in town knew. Harry Connick was there. He hadn't gotten signed yet. And lots of folks were there. After sitting in, Art asked myself and Daryl Grant, who went on to be one of Betty's pianists shortly after me. He had us come back again a second night. And both nights he had me play the piece written by Walter Davis Jr., who had also been one of my teachers in my first year in New York, along with Walter Bishop Jr., a piece called Uranus. And Boo had me play it again the second night. And after that, he called me down to what was his sort of makeshift dressing room, which is downstairs in the basement below Sweet Basil. And he hired me by way of saying, "We're going out to California in 2 weeks. Can you make it?" And this is my dream, to be a messenger. But I told Art at the time, like innocent choir boy, I said, "Well, I want to play with you, Boo, but I'm with Betty. I'm in Betty's band." And Boo just looked at me, "Huh?" So I telephoned Betty and told her, and the timing was perfect. I'd been with her for 4 years. Stephen Scott had just sat in with Betty on a gig I was playing at Fat Tuesdays and played just beautifully. Like I could see the love between the two of them. I knew it was time to go. And Betty did the most wonderful thing, so maternal. She actually said to me on the phone as she was visiting her sister in Flint. I forget if it was Flint or Detroit, but she was visiting her sister in Michigan. Betty said to me, "Benny, I know this is what you've always wanted, and I give you my blessing." That was a beautiful way to join the Messengers. And playing with Art Blakey after the 4 years with Betty, that I felt like I had a sense of experience under my belt after those 4 years with Betty. But it was like starting all over again because it was such a different setting. having maybe 3 different horn soloists at a time, each one with their own personality and sound. And then Art Blakey, bringing so much color and dynamics and emotion, so much shape to the music. Betty did as well, but different. His own shape, his own sound from those drums. You know, with Betty, it was coming from her voice, if we wanted to speak of it in an instrumental sense. And so the sound of Boo's drums they would just sweep over you and they'd lift you up, and he would give shape to your solo. He would give it a whole arc. It was amazing. It was wondrous. You felt like you had wings playing with Boo. Then when you go play with any other drummer, it would sometimes feel like the bottom just dropped out. Playing with other really very good drummers. And that's when you knew, like firsthand, in a feeling sense, in a visceral sense, how Art Blakey had just been carrying you, just lifting you up. Art really thrived from having a turnover in the band. He helped us to develop our sounds, our projection while we were with him, a sense of making a statement in music, telling a story, giving shape to the emotions that are being conveyed in our presentation, and writing for the band, writing specifically for a leader with a strong concept, writing specifically for the messengers. But the goal was for us to become band leaders. So in time, Jeff Keezer came and said, and Jeffrey Keezer, excuse me, my brother, in case he hears this, Jeffrey Keezer sat in with Art Blakey. He had been mentored by James Williams, our older brother, messenger, who inspired all of us, me, Mulgrew Miller, Donald Brown, Jeff. And James introduced Jeff to Art. And Jeff knew all the music. Anyone who knows Jeffrey knows he's kind of a genius. And he came in there knowing all the stuff. And it was time for me to go. And just as Boo had stepped in when the tides were turning, it was time for me to leave Betty. The late Bruce Lundvall of Blue Note Records came down along with Michael Kaskuna and Charlie Laurie to Sweet Basil and heard me with the Messengers. And Bruce asked me to come into his office, and I came in, and he said, "Let's make a record." And so I got signed to Blue Note. And so throughout the 1990s, I recorded for Blue Note Records, and my trio with Christian McBride and Carl Allen did so much for my life, for my music, for my career. And thankfully, I was with Blue Note Records at the time, so we were being well promoted, and we were able to have our tours marginally subsidized by the label. Back in the 1990s, when the economy was different, they called it tour support. I'm checking the time here because Gail gave me permission to go to 2:37. I think it's 2:35. So fast forward throughout the 90s, at the tail end of that time, I started recording with a trio of my dear friend, the guitarist Russell Malone, and Mr. McBride. So the final record that I made for Blue Note was called These Are Soulful Days in 1999. We toured behind that. Then I began recording for Telart at the beginning of 2000 with the same trio, Russ Malone and Christian McBride, an album called Naturally, which also features some solo piano. Then I made a solo piano album, my first solo P album, excuse me, not my first solo P album, I hope. My first solo piano album, which in 2002, which is called Greens Blues. And fast forward to now with quarantine, I've really been embracing playing solo piano at home, something that's been marginalized through my having such a privileged trio career, playing with great bassists and drummers. And so I just want to thank everyone. There's always more, but thank you for listening. I hope some of this was coherent or interesting or enjoyable or all, ideally. Thank you so much, Gail Boyd and Alternative Venues for Jazz, for having me. It's a great honor. Wishing health and peace to all. Thank you.